Okay, everyone, good afternoon. Hello. Well, what a great panel on economic development. I'm Jonathan Bowles. I run the Center for an Urban Future, which is a think tank here in New York City. We're one of the few think tanks that's focused on New York. And we generally look at how to grow and diversify New York's economy and how to expand economic opportunity. And so over the years, we've done reports about everything, as Kyle said in the last panel, how to expand the number of low-income entrepreneurs in New York, but we've also looked at the tech sector in the city, the biotech sector, the role of immigrant-owned businesses, and we've also looked a lot at workforce development and higher education. And you know, I think that as the previous panel focused on, there's a clear need to create jobs. Economic development is crucial for the city. Obviously, we've got an unemployment rate still over 8%. We not only need to create jobs, we need to figure out a way to create good-paying jobs in New York. At the same time, though, and I think kind of segueing to this panel, it's not just enough to create new jobs, because right now, I think too many New Yorkers lack the skills to get good-paying jobs. And you know, it's really troubling to look at the kind of gap that's out there now between the skills that a lot of New Yorkers have and the kind of increasing level of skills or higher education attainment levels that employers in so many different industries are really demanding today. And I wanted to start by just kind of really spending 1 minute and kind of rattling off a couple of statistics about this. Right now, 56% of all job openings require a post-secondary degree, but only 42% of adult residents in New York have one. The unemployment rate in 2012 was 6.2% for people with a college degree, but 10.9% for those with a high school degree or equivalent. Only a little more than 60% of New York City high school students graduate in 4 years. Only about 50% of city residents who take the GED pass. And nearly 1.8 million residents speak English less than very well. So we have a great group of panelists here that, you know, I wanted to get into the issues of how do we actually build the skills of our local workforce? How do we make sure that more New Yorkers can get some of the tech jobs at Google and so many other places that are growing in New York? But beyond tech, how do we really raise the level of skills of the local population? How do we make sure that there is less of this gap between the kind of jobs and the skill level? And so, you know, we're really pleased to have here four amazing folks and experts in their field. Suri Deitch is the University Dean for Continuing Education at CUNY. She's previously been at the Department of Small Business Services, and I've known her for a long time and really glad to have her here. Jamina Bernard is with the Rhodes Charter High School, Charter High Schools, and was formerly at Teach for America. Rashid Davis is the principal at probably the hottest high school in the nation right now. And you know, I mean, between the president, the mayor, the governor, I mean, I don't know how you can get any hotter. So P-TECH, if you haven't heard, so, but I'm looking forward to hearing more about it today. And Hector Cordero Guzman is a professor right here at the Baruch School of Public Affairs and is a former program officer at the Ford Foundation, where he was in charge of the workforce development portfolio. So I've only introduced you very briefly, and I wanted to kind of ask you all to say a little bit more about kind of where you are, how your organizations fit into the workforce development system, but also if you might kind of expand and talk a little bit more about, for the problems that I just led with, the skills gap, you know, what does our workforce development system and educational system in New York City look like, and what needs improvement to address these problems? I know that's a lot, but Hector, do you want to start?
Why don't I get us started? Is this on? Can you hear me? Great. I made myself a little cheat sheet that includes all the key actors in the workforce development system. Because if there's one thing that characterizes the workforce development system, it's both the complexity of actors involved and the fact that it doesn't really always operate as a concerted joint system, even though we call it a workforce system. First is the government, right? Federal, state, city. that enables and provides the funding and supports the kinds of initiatives and programs that train vast segments of the population. Open your report from the partnership to page 51, and you will see some data on the amount of money that is spent in broad workforce system in the city of New York, about $1.3 billion. $740 million spent in non-city agencies, and about $615 million spent by various city agencies. And you get a list of those city agencies. If you're looking for an area where you could have a lot of influence, when you could play strong and play to win, workforce development is certainly one of those areas. In addition to government, who funds and sometimes provides the resources for innovation, perhaps, and scaling up of ideas in the system, you have the business or employer side, and each of those employers are going to be pulling in their own direction, asking for and demanding workers that fit their own particular sets of needs. You have organized labor that's at the table with money through apprenticeships and other resources, and is tasked with supporting workers and providing pathways into opportunity in a range of occupations. You have a range of social service providers at the community level. Some of these providers actually do training. Others just basically do the shape-up that is needed for your populations at the local level to be connected to the larger metropolitan service providers, including CUNY and other large trainers. You have community organizers and community organizations that also play some of this role of doing advocacy and policy development and policy analysis. And lastly, if you look at the chart, there'll be $40 million there that are provided by a team of about 40 foundations in the city that make up something called the New York City Workforce Funders Group. And that is, in my opinion, where a lot of the innovation money comes from foundations that support some of the experiments, that if they succeed, then hopefully they're taken up by the broader kind of metropolitan level city and state funding and supported and replicated throughout the city. That's a little bit of a sense of, maybe not answering your second question about what can be done, but a little bit of a layout of the land and who are the key actors. And of course, educators and the K-12 system play a humongous role, either in moving young men and women through the higher education formal university system, or moving them through the workforce system, which I don't think you should see as a second chance system. You should see as a pathways to opportunity in many other fields than those from which a university degree is necessarily required, which understandably are becoming less and less. But still, we shouldn't see college completion as the only outcome that our young people attain. And oftentimes, by connecting them to a good opportunity early on, it becomes a way to connecting them back to the higher education system. But I'll stop here.
Thanks, Hector. Suri, how does CUNY connect to this, and how does and can you further kind of elaborate on this system we have here, and what still needs improvement?
Right. Thanks. So you're at CUNY, right? You're hearing a lot about CUNY. You heard a lot about CUNY in the last campaign. Just a little bit of context in case you aren't so familiar with the big picture. It's 25 institutions. It's the largest urban university in the country, the third largest public university system, period. 270,000 degree students and another 200,000 or so continuing education students. One of the biggest players in accounting, healthcare, teaching, English as a second language, high school equivalency, and the 200,000 students who I referred to who are in continuing education, most of them are in vocational programs or programs that are helping them learn basic academic skills. So a huge player. And I think from the perspective of outside, even from the perspective of the city council, can sometimes seem like so big that it's hard to sort of pick apart the pieces and understand how you can have an impact. I'd just go back to one of the comments that Maria Gotch made in the last panel that I really liked. She talked about CUNY, and she said, you should be paying attention to resources, making sure that the system has the resources it needs, and also the focus. And I think both are equally important. I mean, we're not here necessarily to have a conversation about resources, but obviously that's huge. On the other end, though, the piece about accountability and quality and focus, and we know that there are many things that we could be doing better. There's no question that the single best thing that we can be doing to contribute to the New York City workforce is increasing graduation rates, right? That is huge. And behind that, though, there are a lot of other things that we need to be doing more of, and where I think that the council can have a role in encouraging us and pushing us along. Exposure to the workplace for our students, our work with the public school system to make sure that individuals are ready for college and careers, as Kathy was saying. We know there is a skills gap, right? We know that there are a lot of people at all levels of education and at all ages and amounts of experience who don't have current skills, who don't have 21st century skills. And I would also just say, on top of that, that there is no single educational model that we're talking about here, right? We need a range of educational models. We need a range of different kinds of schools. CUNY itself, right, 7 community colleges, which are in some ways more the focus of the city than other parts of the system, but all the way up through graduate education and professional education over the long term. We need to be doing all of that work well. And over time, our ability to measure our success gets better and better. One thing, I know Kathy will kill me if I don't go out of my way to mention that at the state level, we're starting to have access to data from the wage record system for the first time. So we can actually know, starting in a few weeks actually, we can know earnings for our graduates, we can know where they're working, we can know whether or not they're working in companies that are in the industries that we trained them for. This is a huge tool for us and is going to go a long way toward helping us understand the quality and the outcomes of what we're doing and holding ourselves accountable. And I think the council has an important role to play in that as well.
Before we move to the K through 12 system, and I'm going to get to Rashid and Jamina in a minute, but I want to ask you a little bit about community colleges. You touched on them, the 7 community colleges in the system, but you know, it seems like for a long time, maybe it's changed recently, the community colleges were kind of the stepchild of the education system overall in New York. From what I understand, they're at record enrollment right now. Seems like the way the economy is changing, you need more than just a high school degree. You know, maybe an associate's degree has become more important. Can you speak to that and like how are the community colleges rising to the challenge, and what way are they fitting into the system?
Sure. So the point about enrollment in community colleges is really important. Over 10 years, our enrollments went up 50%. And some of that was a function of graduation rates going up in the public high schools in the city. Some of it's demographics, and some of it's the economy, right? People are more likely to go to college when the job market is difficult. One of the most notable successes that we've had in the community colleges has been our Accelerated Associate Degree Program, ASAP, where with support from the last administration, support and urging, we actually doubled and even tripled 2- and 3-year graduation rates for students in our community colleges. It's actually an accomplishment that many people thought wasn't impossible, and it is success far beyond anything else that we can point to in our system and even across the country. And so for an example like the ASAP program, which is at about 4,000 students a year out of a population of 80 to 90,000, right? The question there is, how do we take what we've learned and spread it much more broadly so that the many, many more students in our community colleges can start to see the kind of success that we've had for the students in that program.
Great, thanks, Suri. Rashid, can you tell us a little bit behind what's happening? I mean, behind all the excitement and attention that P-TECH has gotten, why was it created? What is it doing that's unique, and why is that so important for New York?
Sure. So P-TECH has city, state, and federal implications. It is a grade 9 through 14 school where students are expected to remain for 6 years to complete the high school diploma, get the equivalent of 2 years of work experience, and have the opportunity to earn an associate in applied science. The collaborators include the New York City Department of Education, the City University of New York. Our college partner specifically is New York City College of Technology, and IBM is the industry partner. Mayor Bloomberg wanted the students to actually have a pathway from high school to the opportunity in industry for a middle-income lifestyle. And what makes it unique is the idea that we're working backwards from the skills that industry say are needed currently. and those skills are then taken to New York City College of Technology and say which degrees make the most sense, so that way the post-secondary credential is informed by the skills that are needed in industry. And then the conversations are had with the people like myself and the teachers to say, how do we make sure these skills are embedded in all of the practices that we do? How do we make sure that job shadowing takes place? How do we make sure that every child is placed with a industry mentor, so that way the access and equity is there? And how do we make sure that the teaching and learning is in a way that gives the skills an engaging opportunity for the students who are not academically screened, so that way they come to life and that the students are interested, and we can provide Google with some software engineers in the future, so that way that is a reality. The excitement really is because we're seeing the collaboration, not just the educators. Many students, and this is my 18th year in New York City high school specifically. I was a principal in the Bronx Engineering Technology Academy. And what you should know as council people is that children are school dependent. And so if you want to prepare them for the workforce, do not have them solely around educators. We need to have the workforce in the schools. Very important. Because they are school dependent, the people who have the most influence on them are the educators. And because the educators are removed from industry, we need industry inside the schools from pre-K through grade 12 on a daily basis. So that way the students understand the significance of industry. They understand the significance of education beyond grade 12 by having college professors in the building, by having industry mentors in the building, and they see that on a daily basis. That is key for you to understand in terms of what makes this particular model different. So students see people who they may not necessarily see in their community. And so we know that there are some students who go through 3 and 4 housing projects on a daily basis to get to school. And so they may not see the economic development that we often talk about in schools, but giving them the access inside the building to the industry mentor, to the college professors. They see a different world. And so what I want you to think about as incoming council members is, how do you make sure in your constituencies that you have the worlds of college and industry in every one of your schools? As we have every child paired with a mentor, you need every educational institution really partnered with both college and industry to make sure that every single day the teaching and learning looks different. And I think that's what really has everyone excited about it, is because we're not academically screened. We're in central Brooklyn, of course, which does not have the best crime stats, but the opportunities that we are providing the students in year 3 has gotten some great attention, but also the year-round approach and how we have used time has also made it clear that maybe the time of the 4-year high school model, the way that we know that it is, no longer needs to be the same case, because we can actually have students actually meet high school requirements sooner than 4 years, but also we need to have them have aspirations beyond the high school diploma, and that's why this model is gaining the interest that it is.
That's great. Well, one of the things that people have said historically about the schools is that it's not enough just to get a high school degree these days, and I think that's one of the interesting things about your model. Right. Jamina, obviously, you know, the high school experience is an important one, but your charter schools are really kind of looking at some really disadvantaged populations. I mean, it's hard enough. I guess we see a challenge in general in graduating students in New York, but some of the folks that you work with have particular challenges.
Right. So ROADS stands for Reinventing Options for Adolescents Deserving Success. And we have, we're in our 2nd year, and we aspire to be like a P-TECH one day. But we are in our 2nd year, and we're currently serving about 200 students in our South Bronx school, and about 200 students in our East New York Brooklyn schools. So we represent Bronx and Brooklyn here. And our students come to us 15 to 17 years old. They're overaged and undercredited, which the way we define that is they're coming to us with 11 credits or less when they come to us. To give you a sense of how that sort of compares with some of the traditional district schools that accept overage and undercredited students as well, the city's transfer schools, for the most part, take in 17-year-olds who have at least 22 credits. And in New York, you need at least 44 credits and need to pass at least 5 regents to graduate. So just to put into context how far behind our students are in particular. And then, so that's the first screen for our students. And then we give actual special preference if you are court involved, if you are homeless or in the foster care system, or somehow otherwise, as I described it, engaged in a city agency of some sort. And what's interesting is, I mean, I would completely agree with what my colleague here has said about what we need to do and how we should aspire to have sort of the both and, if you will, of high school graduation and college and career readiness be really joint with the school experience. But what's interesting is I think about our experience at Rhodes, and part of what motivated us to get the schools up and running was all too often we're actually not thinking about innovative approaches to disrupt the dropout pipeline, if you will. If you think about the population of students that I'm talking about, you know, all too often it's a foregone conclusion to people that if you're 16 years old and you're reading at the 5th grade level, you actually should just be focusing on getting a GED, or you should just be focusing on going to get that job at McDonald's, as opposed to really sort of creating alternative pathways, inviting them, exciting them to get back to school, and then frankly empowering them to figure out what does success look like for them. And the way I describe it in our context, as opposed to sometimes using the jargon of college and career readiness, which frankly for my own child, I expect my child to graduate from high school ready to pursue a college degree and or a career. But the way I describe it in terms that I think our young people get excited about and makes sense to them and their families is to be an active, productive member of their own family and their own community. And so if I describe it that way, you know, I think about, you know, what our focus was in our first year. Our first year really was to figure out what might it take to get our students to come, just to come to school, right? So it is charter, so we had a lottery system. So, you know, on the surface, so in the beginning we had 300 students apply for, we had 1,000 eligible students apply for what was 300 seats. So we knew there was a demand for an alternative model, if you will, for our young people. But getting in and then actually showing up every day are two very different things. So we put a lot of emphasis in our first year on you know, small class sizes. We put a lot of emphasis on higher adult to student ratios, recognizing that sort of the adult to student interactions matter a lot to make our young people feel cared for and valued. And what the data showed after our first year was that the attendance on average for our students was actually higher than any other experience they had in a school system. So that was a good first win for us. The second year for us right now has been about increasing the rigor, increasing the academic rigor in our schools. So it's not just enough to have strong relationships and feel good about our attendance rates. We absolutely need to increase the rigor and show our students what is possible, and frankly show our students what it feels like to get to earn their first credits and then appreciate how much hard work they're going to have to put in to get all 44 credits. You know, I was describing to you earlier, Jonathan, in a lot of ways, while we're at the early stages of it, and so have not yet developed the tight partnerships or finalized what our theory of action is going to be to ensure that the entire continuum for our students leads to both that college and career readiness. I think about the work that we're doing with our young people as critical workforce development actions, if you will. So showing up every day, showing up on time, being prepared and ready to learn, being ready to engage, being ready to learn how you compartmentalize the trauma in a lot of ways and the drama that you deal with in your life, and coming to work, i.e. school, ready to take ownership for your experience and your success. In a lot of ways, when I think about our population, I think those are some of those habits of minds that our young people need to then appreciate what it's ultimately going to take to be successful in life and pursue that kind of career that they want. So it's a non-traditional approach to thinking about workforce development, if you will.
Great. So Jamina and Rashid, you've got some really innovative educational programs. I'm just curious to move this forward to a policy level. You know, we've got this adult workforce development system. You go to a Workforce One center and you might get placed into a job. We've got a youth workforce system that includes, but is not limited to, like the summer youth employment program. We've got CUNY, we've got the P through 12 system. But obviously, we're failing in so many ways. You know, as I mentioned, the skills gap at the start of this this panel. So, what are the things where there are pressure points for the City Council or for this next administration that we should be focusing on making improvements that go beyond maybe individual programs or schools, but really, what could the next council do?
So I would, going back to a couple things that I had just touched on earlier. So one is paying attention to what are the metrics, what are the measures that you can reasonably use to try to look at quality and outcomes in education. And so obviously graduation rate is a big one. Graduate earnings is another big one. Even just retention and progress toward high school degree and college degree, those are important measures. You know, there's a lot of conversation about how do you measure quality of education, and a lot of disagreements about that. I think there are many different ways to go about it, even walking into a classroom and seeing high quality instruction. That is one way to look at it, but then you also need to look at sort of what happens to people once they walk out of the classroom. I would say hold us accountable with those kinds of measures, but also look at student exposure to the workplace and help us think about additional opportunities and resources to support those initiatives, because we hear consistently from employers that graduates, recent college graduates, young people coming into the workplace don't have, as Jamina said, the habits of mind, the understanding of showing up on time, the understanding of communication skills, working in a group, those kinds of things. And those are the kinds of things that you get best through experience and exposure and learning from role models. And there's a huge amount, I think, that we could be doing in this area, both in the K-12 system and in higher education. And I think we could use your support to be pushing that along.
It's not that surprising that some of the ingredients that Rashid was mentioning were keys to the success of P-TECH are similar to the ingredients that are needed for the success of workforce programs, right? First, learning by doing. You don't put people in the classroom to learn something that they need to do to learn better, right? The kind of contextual learning or learning in context. Having employers at the table. If you're talking to a workforce program and the first question you ask is where are the employers, and the answer is we'll find them after we train, you pretty much have an idea that you're not sitting in front of best practice. I'm not saying you're standing in front of a useless program, but it may not be at the top of their game, and your role will be to investigate how to get them to the top of their game. I don't know if Rashid's curriculum is linear, but I think in workforce we're dispensed with the linear. Everybody needs to learn the same thing by the same time, and we focus more on competencies and skills, and people are going to arrive at those competencies and skills at slightly different paces. And I think we take kind of multiple approaches to the teaching. We don't expect everybody to learn something in the same way. And I'm sure your teachers try one, the true one tried, and then they try again, and then they try a different method, a different style. So I think part of your job as a council member is to look at the ecology of programs you have in your area and in your district and see whether they're conforming with some of those best practices. And you need to kind of identify what are the needs of your constituents, which may not be the same as the needs of other parts of the city or other parts of the system. What are the assets that you have in your community? What are the specific needs that you have in your community? And then how do you help build networks between those providers in your local area that no one can deliver a quality service with other actors in the workforce system? You are going to be their advocate. You are going to be their champion, both in terms of the support and funding, but also in terms of elevating their profile and highlighting the practices that they put in place that make them effective for the members of your community. Because in this area of evidence-based funding, which I think is terrific, and it beats any of the other alternatives I can think of, throw a dart at the board, or doing it by friendship, or doing it by who pays you more. Evidence is the best system. But not everything that works has been investigated. Not everything that works in the same way for everybody. So part of your role potentially as a council member is to uncover some of those things that work particularly well for your constituents and educate others around the city and sometimes in central government about the need to kind of fund and support those practices that are particularly effective for your constituents. It's about what works, but it's also about what works for whom under what conditions. And I think your job is to push the conversation further than the simple what works.
I think it's important also to not think of business as usual. And so when I think of what's important in terms of from just a teaching and learning aspect, it's very great to be sitting here in Baruch because 3 of my assistant principals actually that I hired, I mentored from a Baruch program, the scaffolded apprenticeship model that's here at Baruch. And actually, if you look at the way that they know how to give feedback to teachers. That's one of the innovative models that you need to actually be aware of, but also beyond looking at teacher ed programs. You need to be thinking about what are some of the best practices as we look at the implementation of the Common Core, as we look at a new principal and teacher evaluation. What are the tools that would actually give students and teachers the best overall picture? The Green Book need to be embedded into the high school admissions process. So that way families are completely aware and have access to that information. The Green Book is a powerful tool. And when you look at that online piece, if you can just make sure that that's part of the admissions process, that would be very, very helpful so that way families really have lots of information to that. It's so important to understand when I say that children are school dependent, that it's not just about election time that you need to actually be involved in the communities. Your constituents, mom and pop stores, sole vendors, small businesses, they also need to have consortiums in terms of how they are working collaboratively with schools so that way when it comes to internships, they're not fighting for the same student, but we're actually seeing how service learning and internships can actually be used in terms of with all of those constituencies. It's so important in terms of to make sure that we understand collaboration is key, and it's not about just sending the students outside of their community to the industry. It's so important to bring the industry into our communities so that way the students and families can see on a daily basis the economic development and growth that's occurring here in the city. And I think that's what we continue to do, and I want to just make sure that we share that and we talk about those realities. It's about the teaching and learning, the new practices, but also making sure that industry is in the building and not just about sending the students outside of the building for the industry experiences.
Rashid, let me ask you another related question, and it came up to a certain extent in the last panel because we hear all the time that one of the real fast-growing industries is tech, but the biggest challenge they face is talent. And so, how do we build a long-term pipeline so that more people that are born and grow up in this city or come here can build the skills so that they can get those jobs? And P-TECH is one way that the city is addressing that. Hopefully it will be expanded. But are there other things that you think from your connection with tech and some of the students that are getting those skills? What else can the city do to get people into that pipeline?
Put them into the schools. The schools have to be seen as lab sites. It's not enough just to have the industries outside of the school, because you have inside of this, as I said, as long as the children are only seeing educators, it's a serious disconnect. I have game designers right now in terms of who will run circles around all of the adults.
Even if it's not a tech school like a P-TECH or a coding school, which Fred Wilson started, you're saying, let's get entrepreneurs, let's get engineers, come into the schools from time to time?
Oh, not every day, not from time to time.
Be
They
teachers.
need to actually have offices. We need to talk about in terms of how do we share space? How do we make sure every teacher has an industry mentor? How do we make sure that we're talking about when you look at Michael Haberman's Principles Organization, that should be a year-long, everyday experience in terms of making sure that there's not only a principal for a day, but a teacher for a day, and having the industry professionals actually in the schools on an ongoing basis. It really changes the expectations of the outcomes. We're not only talking about the educators being the sole providers of the sense of role models for children. They need to be able to see multiple educated people at this particular impressionable age that they're dealing with.
Yeah. If I could just pick up on that, I mean, I completely agree. And if I think about the reality of our students' experiences in the Southern Boulevard area of the South Bronx and in East New York, Brooklyn, where and actually sort of removed a bit from the Southern Boulevard section of the Bronx. So being more in a food desert kind of area and mostly housing projects around there as opposed to more of the local businesses around there. It's, and our name is called Reinventing Options for Adolescents Deserving Success. So we are currently just thinking about it for all intents and purposes from the educational experience. But if we're being serious about reinventing options and reinventing pathways, then it's important, and I think a lever that our city council members can play is to bring innovators, to bring entrepreneurs, to bring business and other potential partnerships to our schools. And then obviously not just Rhodes, but to low-income communities throughout the city, obviously, and to schools in particular, to actually work with the students and the families, not just the educators, and to brainstorm and really be innovative about how could we reimagine what success and what industry could look like. What could it look like such that we're all excited to make our community vibrant together? I mean, I think, candidly, one of the challenges, it's easy for me to say that, I think, to some degree as an educator, so I'll be honest and say that, because that's a long-term game, right? So to say it as an educator, not necessarily an elected official, it's a long-term game. But to the extent that we care about the long-term success and sustainability of our local communities, which I think ultimately leads to the success and vibrancy of our city, I think that's what it's going to take. It's not just about getting our students to do internships out of their local communities and partner with organizations out of their local communities. They love to do that, and they have to do that, because I think that ultimately lends to their vision of excellence and their vision of success and what could be for themselves and their local communities as well. But if it's just about going out and sort of partnering for sake of going out, if you will, as opposed to coming in, I'm not convinced we're going to get to the level of true economic development in every community that needs it across this city.